I really want to try to design vegetation and encourage other people to design vegetation, which is really good for supporting local biodiversity. Complexity of plants, how many different species you have, inevitably leads to complexity of spatial form, and that just creates a whole range of niche for a lot of organisms to live in that vegetation. I'm James Hitchmough, and if you want the full title, I'm Professor Emeritus in the Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of Sheffield. What do? I think, I write, and I'm just sort of always asking questions about the world in relation to planting design, biodiversity, human well-being, climate change, all really the big issues of the time, trying to set horticulture and landscape architecture in a policy context and saying what should we be doing, where should we be going. I've worked on projects all over the world and done projects really from the scale of new urban woodlands in the centre of Beijing all the way to massive sort of woodland restoration projects in Western China on the scale of thousands of square kilometres. And the aim has always been to try to increase awareness and appreciation of nature in urban places. My relationship with Burnley, the University of Melbourne, it was my first job after finishing my PhD in the UK, and so in a way, it's where I cut my teeth, and it's a sort of really special place for me. When I first came here, I was really young. I was only 26 or 27. Of course, I was looking for some sort of big idea or research direction for me for the rest of my career. And what really supplied it to me was actually looking at the native grasslands on the western plains of Victoria, which I thought were very beautiful and just seemed to have so much potential as a landscape design form. And during that time, I played a major role in beginning to develop research understanding and how we might use these native plants from the Western Plains in designing landscapes in the city. And as part of that, I also designed the grass garden at Burnley, which is open to the public and you can see. From that time on, I started thinking about how could I make sort of very beautiful flowering grassland type vegetation in cities. And when I went back to the UK, I really began to look at a much more eclectic range of vegetation types. And I looked at this through research, and then as our research developed and I learned how to make a whole range of different vegetation types that no one had ever made before, I started getting asked to try to create those in public landscapes, often on a very big scale. And so I ended up in 2007 being asked to co-design, actually, with a colleague who was doing similar things, the London Olympic Park. And that was a huge project, huge gig. And I eventually ended up designing and creating 10 hectares of native wildflower meadows. It was the first Olympic Park in the world where you didn't have just mown grass and trees. So it was a hugely ambitious and a big risk-taking project. So up on the roof at the University of Melbourne, Burnley, we have the trial gardens for the Melbourne Arts Precinct project. And we've got 3 beds. Here to the right, we have a substrate depth of 100 millimetres. To the right behind me, we have 200 millimetres, and to the left behind me, we have 300 millimetres. And what we're doing here is we're testing how the individual plants grow and also how they sort of compete with one another to try to get a longer-term sense of how we're going to select the very final plants for the real project in the Melbourne Arts Precinct. So the Melbourne Arts Precinct, it's a project to essentially build a new gallery of contemporary art behind the existing National Gallery on St Kilda Road. The space around the galleries is going to be repurposed as a major new garden for Melbourne. And the scale is enormous. I mean, we're talking about 18,000 square metres of planting, so that's just under 2 hectares. So the name of the garden is Lark Bundap, which is its Wurundjeri name. The whole project in terms of the garden will be finished probably in 2029. So it's a slow-burning project and gives us a lot of time to actually work out in a very precise way what we're going to do, which is a real luxury on many of these projects. So this garden is a behind-the-scenes research facility, so it doesn't have public access. But if you want to see what it looks like in a sort of more real-world context, there is a test garden on the corner of Federation Square in Melbourne, just by the car park, which is freely available. So this test planting is the result of a large number of people collaborating with different skills. And my particular role in this has been to, in the first instance, try and identify what the plant palette might be for the conditions we're going to have in the project. And so we'll be able to get closer and closer to the spatial arrangements and the species we're going to use in the real thing in the future. With climate change, Melbourne is projected to have the climate of Dobbo in the present moment by 2060, 2070. And so we have to have some species in there which we're pretty sure will have the resilience to be able to persist in the longer term. When we design this sort of vegetation, you're looking at it sort of, as perhaps a single thing, but I see it as 3 layers. We have a base layer, something from 0 to perhaps 20, 30 centimeters. And then we have an emergent sort of layer, often called a bump layer, and it might go up to 600. And then we have what we call a tall emergent layer, and that might be anything from, 1 meter to 2 meters. But the bottom is really important because the bottom layer is what's always there, often evergreen. Say we've got 10 plants per square meter. We'd normally have 9 plants or 8 plants in that bottom layer. And then in the next layer, we might have 1 or 2. And then in the top layer, we might only have 0.1 of a plant, i.e. a plant every 10 square meters. So if you do that, you create a structure which allows light to get in. It also has a lot of visual dynamism because of the upright stems, and you get these rhythms and patterns, and you get this movement when the wind blows. So it might look completely random, but in actual fact, it's designed using spreadsheets and ratios, as well as scribbling with a fat pencil on a piece of paper. So it's a very creative process, but it's also a very science-based process too. So in terms of my hopes for the future of this vegetation, when it becomes like Bundap in the Arts Precinct project, I mean, obviously, the base thing I'd like to achieve is it's got to look fabulous, and it's really got to capture people's hearts and imagination. At a time of biodiversity crisis and the sort of, the well-being crisis we have in our cities, it's really important that we try to elevate the significance of vegetation in the city. It's not just nice to have, it's actually an essential to have. And, we've got to start valuing this sort of stuff, as much as we value built infrastructure. Because, the future lies really in terms of 21st century, in terms of dealing with vegetation in cities and making them habitable, resilient, climate-responsive places. So I really hope that this will start a lot of conversations about that. And I hope that that will have a lasting legacy in Australia.